Hi, Chris here from Brickhouse Paddles, and in this little video I want to talk to you about what you should be thinking about if you're trying to find the right pickleball paddle. So usually when somebody asks me, hey Chris, what should I be looking at for a paddle? Everybody's going to be different. You can give somebody or two different people the same paddle, one will like it, one will hate it. So it's a very subjective thing to define. So I'm going to try and run through some things that give you some background on things to consider when you're looking for a new paddle. I always start with a bunch of questions when people ask me that. So the questions I usually start with are, what do you want the paddle to do? What are you trying to improve in your game? Where are you looking to take it? Are you just starting out? Are you looking to improve your game? What type of if you are, what type of game are you playing? Are you playing closer to the net? Are you playing back and more of a power game? Are you looking for better control for things like resets and drops? What do you want that paddle to do? Then are you playing indoors, outdoors? Because that can make a difference. If you're playing outdoors a lot, weather affects the way the ball travels. So sometimes people like a little bit of heavier paddle. If you're playing indoors, maybe you want a little bit more speed. Do you have any physical handicaps or injuries that you might need to accommodate? Things like arthritis in the hand, maybe in the elbow, maybe you've got some tennis elbow, because that can be reflected in grip size and paddle weight. So there may be some physical things you have to consider when you're looking for a new paddle as well. And finally, what's your budget? Paddles range anything from anywhere from $70 all the way up to well over $400 now. So make sure you have a pretty good idea of what you want to spend. So that's usually where I start, and then we'll just run through what kind of affects the way a paddle plays. Let's talk about the shape of the paddle. There are basically three different shapes out there. There's kind of a standard shape paddle, kind of like that's kind of an older version of our Retro 65. This one goes back about 5 or 6 years, but it's more of a traditional shape. It's fairly uniform in length. It's a little bit wider. Usually they're somewhere around 7 3/4 to 8 inches wide by about 16 inches or 15.5 to 15 3/4 inches tall. That's kind of a traditional paddle shape. It'll give you a little wider sweet spot. They tend to be a little bit more forgiving. Then you have an elongated paddle, which is a little bit longer, a little bit narrower. They tend to have a sweet spot closer to the head of the paddle, tends to be a little bit smaller. Great paddles if you are looking for more power, because your sweet spot is up closer to the head, and generally the paddle's coming through a little bit more speed to it, so you can generate a little bit more power. And they also tend to generate a little bit more spin. So when you get into the pro level, some of the guys some of the people like those elongated paddles better. There's also a different shape now. It's more of a hybrid shape, like what we call our number 8 series, which is available in the Heritage, and also our new carbon fiber C108. These are hybrid shapes, so they're an elongated paddle, but they're a little bit thinner and a little bit longer handle on them. They tend to have a little bit more of a curved profile to the top, take some of the weight out of the top. You'll find these tend to be a little bit lighter. They're very quick, very agile. They develop great spin. They've got a really nice feel to them, but they do have a smaller sweet spot, so you do have to be a little bit more focused on where you're hitting the ball. They also tend to have a little bit less twist to them, and when I say twist, it means if you have an off-center hit, so you're hitting up near the edge here, what generally happens, that ball hits that and that paddle twists just a little bit. The narrower the paddle, the less twist you're going to have on it. So it's going to be a little bit more adaptable to control. So then that kind of goes into our next topic, which is surface material. Now your surface material really helps determine the feel of the paddle, and it helps to develop the control more so, I think, than most things. Sometimes the durability as well, but there really are, if you include us, there's 3 different types of paddle surfaces. There's a carbon fiber, which tends to disperse the impact of the ball a little better, and it takes some of the pop out of the paddle, so you get a more controlled feel to it. There's fiberglass, which tends to be very poppy. Fiberglass by nature is more compressible than carbon fiber, so it tends to have a little bit more of a rebound to it. So if you're looking for a paddle with a lot of pop or a little bit more power, you might want to look more towards a fiberglass paddle. And then finally, there is the wood plane surface with a carbon fiber substructure. And this kind of gives you the best of that feel that you get from a wood paddle that you don't get from another type of paddle. But it gives you a very nice dampened feel to it. The carbon fiber underneath it gives it a lot of control. It's a very interesting surface to play. I'm not going to go on too much about it, but it's a really interesting surface to play. The next thing you want to maybe think about is your core type. There are really there's two basic types of cores now. There are foam cores, and then there are honeycomb cores. Honeycomb cores are sort of your traditional core that has been used for the last probably 10 years. There's been different variations on it. There are different types of honeycomb cores. There's what they call polypropylene, which is probably the most prevalent at the moment. Then there are Nomex, which is a resin-impregnated paper, and then there's aluminum. Each one imparts a different characteristic to the paddle and the way it plays. Honeycomb, or the polypropylene honeycomb, tends to be more predominant now as it absorbs more of the impact and gives you a little bit more control. You also have different thicknesses in core now. You've got 12 millimeters to 16 millimeters. I think somebody had a 20 millimeter. Personally, I like to stay with the 12 millimeter. That's kind of my go-to. I find it's a nice balance between power and control. We will be experimenting at some point with some thicker paddles, but not right at the moment. And then the other thing is the foam cores. And foam cores, you're generally going to see in your compression molded paddles. Most of the foam cores are going to play a little bit softer. They're going to have maybe a little bit more power because the foam compresses a little bit more. Although they still have to meet US APA regulations as far as rebound goes. But foam cores, it's really still kind of an experimental technology. Guys are really putting a push on it, largely because foam is easier to mold when you're doing compression molding. And it's more forgiving than a polypropylene honeycomb. There's no crush to a foam that's going to affect paddle performance down the road. In the early days of thermal forming, paddles had issues with delamination and developing what they called a trampoline effect, which led to a bunch of issues with paddles being too powerful, but that's another story. Anyway, foam core is generally going to give you a little bit of a softer feel to it. It's going to be a little quieter. It's going to have a different sound to it. There's still a lot of development going on, and most of your pros are still playing the honeycomb paddles. So there you go. As far as core goes, something to think about. Grip size and shape. Grip is a really personal thing. You're going to find that most grips are somewhere between 4 1/8 and 4 1/4 in circumference. There are some that are smaller, some are a little bigger, but that's generally where it's going to be. Where you're going to notice the biggest difference is in the shape of the paddle. Some paddle handle grips are a little bit wider and a little bit thinner. Ours, for example, are more octagonal, so they're a little bit more uniform, which I like for blocking at the net. So if you're at the net and you need to be a little faster, I find it easier to do a punch volley with these. Some people like a little bit wider grip that locks the paddle into your hand a little bit more so that it doesn't twist. But again, everything is a compromise. The other thing that you're going to find with the grip size is it can really affect the feel of the paddle and the strain on your elbow, wrist, and obviously your hand. Sometimes when you get into a shape that isn't right for your hand, it's either too big or too small, you can grip the paddle too hard and it will create tension in your elbow, so it can lead to tennis elbow. You'll find maybe if it's too small, you're having trouble hanging onto the paddle. So grip size, it's really easy to make a paddle grip bigger. It's very difficult to make it, well, for most people, it's very difficult to make it smaller. For us, it's not a big deal. If you order a paddle from us, we can custom do a grip size for you. But something you might want to think about is, how does the paddle feel? Do you want more of an oval grip, or do you want more of an octagonal grip that gives you a little bit more flexibility in how you hold that paddle? And finally, texture. The texture impacts your spin potential. How much surface texture is on that paddle? You can hear this one's got a fair bit of surface texture on it. Surface texture is great. There's a couple of different ways that you can apply it. You can mold it into the paddle like this one, or you can use an applied grit. That will help develop spin. It's not the only way to develop spin. If you look at this paddle, it's got very smooth. You can hear there's no real texture to that. But what it does have is a very high coefficient of friction that grabs the ball. So it's, if you wanted to compare it to something, it would be, well, maybe like a rubber. It's not, but if you wanted to compare rubber to a piece of glass, that would be your difference in your coefficient of friction. So a paddle with a good coefficient of friction can sometimes even outperform a paddle with a huge surface texture, depending on the shape of the surface texture. So when you're looking for a paddle, you might want to think about the ability to spin. What's going to create that spin? Is it an applied grit? Is it coefficient of friction? The other thing is the texture on the paddle. What's the durability of it? If it's an applied texture, it's probably going to start to wear off the first time you play it and degrade further still. If it is a molded texture, it's going to last longer in all likelihood, depending on how long you play and how often you play. Something to think about. If it is a relatively smooth texture, like what we use on our paddles, it's going to, the ability to spin, the texture is going to really last you the life of the paddle and probably improve with this one as the surface finish breaks in. The other thing that generates spin is your dwell time. So if you're looking for a paddle that really spins, you might want to look more towards a fiberglass or something with a softer finish on the front. The longer that ball sits on the paddle, when it makes contact with it, that's what they call the dwell time. That longer, or the larger that dwell time, the more spin you're going to get from that paddle. Wow, that's, I think, the longest I've ever gone through on one shot. Anyway, I hope I didn't bore you, and got some more stuff coming. So something else we'll talk about, it goes into paddle types, and there's lots of different ways to construct a paddle. So there's really what they call a cold press technology, where you basically laminate two sheets of carbon fiber or fiberglass, or in our case, carbon fiber and wood, to a core, and that is, it gives you a more consistent feel in the paddle. There's thermoform, which is generally revolves around foam core paddles. They're okay. There's pros and cons to both cold press and thermoform. Thermoformed, they have had a lot of issues with delamination and core crush, but with some of the new foams that are coming out, I don't think it's as big of an issue as it once was. And they're going to play differently. So they're going to play a little bit harder. They're going to play with a little bit more power. They're not going to be as controllable. And they are difficult to modify. So if you wanted to make a grip on a thermoform paddle smaller, you're probably not going to be able to, because they're usually a unibody construction, which includes the handle. Then there are edgeless paddles. If you like the looks of them, terrific. They do look sharp, but if you are playing outside or you're really tough on your paddles, you may not want to look at an edgeless paddle. once they're damaged, they're damaged. There's really not much up here protecting your paddle from impact damage. There's really probably just a little bit of carbon fiber or filler along the edge, and then there's foam underneath. So not a lot of strength in the outer edge of that edgeless paddle. The other thing is they're not really repairable. Our edge guards, we replace probably, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40, maybe 50 edge guards a year where people have cracked them from hitting the ground or tapping the paddle or, some sort of a physical injury. So if you have an edgeless paddle, you can't just replace your trim. The other nice thing about the trim, depending on the trim, and something you want to think about too while I'm on the topic, is you want to look at the trim on a paddle. There's lots of different materials out there, and if it's a very flexible and rubbery type of trim, it's not providing any strength to the outside of that paddle, which is kind of a key area, and that can lead to core crush and paddle deterioration along the edge of that paddle from things like tapping paddles, ground strikes, hitting the ball improperly. This edge trim, it should be structural, and it should provide protection to the outer edge of that core. It'll also, the trim, if you are worried about twist in the paddle, having that little extra weight on the outside edge of the paddle can be really beneficial in reducing the amount of twist you get off a paddle, which is something you won't get with an edgeless paddle, and they tend to be a little bit more twist prone if you mishit. So what about throated paddles? Those are the ones you see, they've got kind of a cutout near the handle. Originally, those were designed to provide a little bit more whip, almost like a golf club shaft. And it was designed to flex a little bit through the handle, so to give you some whip coming through for more power. USAPA, when they saw this coming, they changed the rules on paddle certification, came up with a test for it, and basically negated that development in paddles. Apart from looking neat, maybe changing the balance point, taking a little bit of weight out of the paddle, there really isn't a lot of advantage that anyone has been able to, at least to me, quantify. So it's up to you. If you like the looks of it, terrific. If you think it's a great paddle, awesome. There's lots of them out there, lots of different manufacturers and different brands. So cheap versus expensive paddles. Materials, manufacturing processes, and marketing make up the bulk of the cost of the paddle. There's also a lot of R&D in some of these paddles and tooling costs, but as far as materials go, like the difference in materials between this paddle and an expensive paddle might only be $2 or $3 a paddle. The tooling costs that go into this and the R&D that go into this can be significant. If I'm just buying a paddle that a manufacturer has already developed and I'm just putting my brand on it, I don't have R&D costs, I don't have tooling costs that I have to deal with. So, you're going to find some of the off-the-shelf paddles or out of the catalog paddles are going to be less expensive because they don't have a lot of that R&D that goes into it, and they're basically just putting a sticker on it. Manufacturing processes differ. So sometimes a thermoform paddle can be less expensive to produce, especially if it's using a foam core. That being said, foam core is, at the moment at least, probably a little bit more expensive than your traditional honeycomb cores. But your manufacturing process, including the tooling that goes into it, thermoforming, most tools are individual to the paddle, so they're produced kind of one at a time if you want. Large volume, but one at a time. Those tools are expensive. Finishing techniques, how the paddle is finished. Is it just a raw carbon? What do they print it on? Do they put a seal coat on it? What type of edge trim do they put on it? Those are things that add a little bit of cost to the paddle, but not significantly. Again, the difference between an expensive paddle and a cheap paddle comes down to manufacturing process is probably a lot of it. And the other is marketing and sponsorship. There's a huge portion of marketing and sponsorship that goes into an expensive paddle. It's expensive because they want to let people know they've got a good paddle or they've got a paddle out there, and that costs money. Pros don't come cheap. Advertising doesn't come cheap. Distribution doesn't come cheap. So those are kind of what really make the difference between a cheap paddle versus an expensive paddle. Materials, process costs, design and marketing. Is a $75 paddle going to be the same as a $400 paddle? Probably not. There are differences you will notice. Sometimes you just pick up a paddle and it feels cheap. So if it feels cheap, it probably is cheap. The other thing I would just sort of in closing, beware of online reviews. Like I mentioned earlier, paddles are subjective. They're not. There's no hard and fast rule. If I like a paddle, you might not like it, and vice versa. So when you watch an online review or you're listening to somebody or you're reading an article about a paddle, ask yourself a few questions. One is, did that guy or did the reviewer buy that paddle, or was he given it by the manufacturer? If he was given it by the manufacturer, how many reviews has he done for that manufacturer, that group of manufacturers? His job is to do reviews and keep the paddles coming. And to do that, you can't be slamming a paddle that you're really not all that happy with. So take that with a grain of salt. The other thing is you have to ask yourself, is the guy that is doing the interview and he's basing it on what he thinks of that paddle, is he playing the same game that you're playing? Is he looking for the same things in a paddle that you're looking for in a paddle? And are his experiences the same as yours? And you know what? I guarantee you they're probably not. So be wary of online reviews. Use them as a base, but don't use them as a gospel truth that that paddle is going to perform the way you think it's going to perform. That person is not you. So, and like I said, paddle selection is very subjective. That's kind of my tips and things to think about on getting the right paddle for your game. Ask yourself the questions. What do you want the paddle to do? Where's your game? That sort of stuff. Beware of online reviews and think about what goes into a paddle and what gives it the different characteristics. Hope that helped. I'm sorry it was so long, but hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the courts sometime soon, hopefully, for the Brickhouse paddle.